is that as more and more teachers are becoming mobilists, as my friend Elliot Soloway calls us, that they are becoming more receptive to the idea of using a wide range of different mobile devices within their classroom. So a linkage between that personal value proposition and adoption. Given all of that, we also are seeing that it is still a learning process. It's not Jell-O yet. We don't have it all set. There's a lot of experimentation going on. There's a lot of trial and error. There's things that are working. There are things that are not working. And so we are still in the milieu of that sort of process. And then the other observation that I have, based again on the evaluation work that we've been doing, is that in some cases, and I know that this is often hard for all of us to do, but where we see that the teachers are adopting possibly a little bit more of a let-go philosophy in terms of either trying some things or trusting the students to take the lead in learning, we're actually seeing some fabulous results coming out of that. Now, one of the other things that we think is particularly interesting is that when we look at this evolution, to use Chris's word from this morning, this evolution in the adoption of mobile learning in the classroom, we have seen a significant change. So it could be that we are very much at a new tipping point in terms of thinking about the impact of mobile learning. So one of the questions that we ask on the Speak Up survey for the last couple of years is that we've been asking teachers as well as administrators, what do you think are the benefits of using mobile devices within the learning process? And what really struck me is when we went back and looked at our 2007 data, so what teachers told us in 2007 versus what teachers told us in 2011, look at that difference in terms of the growth in the perception that mobile learning provides a way to personalize instruction. So we're all talking more and more about personalized instruction, and how interesting to see that the teachers themselves, as well as the administrators, are realizing that these devices could be an important component of that personalized instruction process. Okay, so let's get into our conversation with our expert panel that is here to share all their insights. And we're going to sort of frame this conversation around 4 big topics. We'll see how far we get into this because, again, there's that glass of Chardonnay waiting at the end of the golden road here. I would want to talk with them about impact, challenges, opportunities, and their vision. So let's start right off. I'd like to have each one of you tell us a little bit about how mobile learning is being implemented in your school, in your class, and give us a little bit of a statement regarding what you're seeing as the impact, either on yourself as an instructional leader or on your students. Dana, you want to start?
Sure. At St. Elizabeth, we are currently in the process of rolling out one-to-one iPads for the next school year. So we have a student population of 365, and next year it will be necessary for all of them to have an iPad for their device. Currently, we have bring your own device classrooms, and we have teachers that are working diligently to make sure that that happens. I've been teaching one-to-one in a lab setting for the last 6 years, but students are certainly welcome and encouraged to bring in their phones. I have a joke when they walk in the classroom, they take their phone out. If I tell them that we can use it, we can use it. If they don't, then it sits there and it's a practice in self-control until the bell rings and they leave. It has impacted how I teach immensely over the last couple of years since I've been kind of playing with this in my classroom. It's really revolutionary. It's an evolution, but it's really revolutionary. The impact that it's had on my students is that they're so much more engaged. The Revolutionary War is going to be the Revolutionary War. There's no rewriting history. I'm teaching things that can't change with things that are constantly changing. So for me, it is how am I allowing them to see it in a different light? How am I allowing them to see it in a way that is going to allow them to want to enter in and want to be completely engaged in learning about, you know, a Revolutionary War figure or something that's going on in World War II? And how is it relevant to them today? Because they're not seeing the connection to history. So if they're not seeing the connection to history, then maybe they can see it through utilizing things like their phone and utilizing things like photo booth on their iPad, something like that.
Okay, good start off. We're going to come back with some follow-up questions there, but I want to hold those.
Okay.
Joan, tell us about, and I definitely want you to talk about your website too.
Oh, okay, great. So my experience is mostly with Bring Your Own Device. I'm lucky enough to have a class set of iPads for the first quarter, thanks to our fabulous technology coordinator, Sandy Munnell. But most of my experience is with Bring Your Own Device. And like Dana said, everything's changing. Dana's class is about history. I teach science. Science is constantly changing. So these mobile devices make it so that the outside world is constantly flowing through our room. It used to be that class was, that's the time I saw my students, and I only had an hour and a half with them, and I had to do as much as I could. They're fabulous questions. I had to tell them to put their hands down, and we need to move forward. Now, my hour and a half is just one of the meetings that we have. It just happens to be a physical meeting. But class goes throughout the day. I even get tweets sometimes late in the evening that I can choose to answer, or I can wait until the morning. But so definitely bringing social media and having it completely integrated into class would be most likely impossible without the use of mobile devices. And then, as Julie mentioned, I have a website that really is the linchpin to the whole thing. It's thescienceroom.org. And here I'm able to aggregate Twitter hashtags that are relevant to that lesson. So if I'm teaching about the movie Blue Gold, I can have a hashtag aggregate at the very bottom of my lesson where students are seeing people all over the world currently tweeting about the topic that they're learning. And so it brings a level of relevance to the classroom that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Great, good introduction. Again, I'm holding some follow-up questions. You may already be thinking some. So let's jump down to elementary school, and let's hear what's happening in 4th grade, Bill.
Well, at Jamestown, we're lucky to have a very supportive administration that has gone out and got the tools for us, the mobile devices for us to use. We use them not only in 4th grade, but all the way down to pre-K, all the way up to 5th grade. And we're doing projects, as simple as learning the alphabet, or as complicated as 5th graders making e-books about the scientific principles that they're studying. And they'll pull movies in and text and pictures. It really has changed the way, at least in my classroom, the students get really excited. Their first question is, are we using the iPads today? Or how can we use the iPads in this lesson? And some of them even start to think outside the box of, oh, hey, Mr. Donovan, we could do this on the iPads to go along with this lesson. So even they're thinking about how we can integrate it.
Fabulous. Okay, so I've got my next question for you is, given all of that, and these are fabulous stories, and obviously you're all very creative and innovative and have supportive administration all the way along the line, so a lot of the key elements are already in place. What have been the challenges that you faced?
Me?
If you'd like to start.
Okay. I think some of the challenges that we face is, obviously we are a private school, so we have to have parental buy-in. We have to have parents that are willing to support, and we have almost made it an expectation, but we also have to take into consideration that there are people that are paying our $10,000 tuition and then also can't afford, the parental buy-in of purchasing an iPad or something along those lines as well. So we face those challenges, and we need to come up with creative ways to offer financial support to the kids that can't afford it, to the families that can't afford it. We also, I think one of the other challenges is, and I think we all know this, is technology is great until it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, what do? You have to drop back and punt, and you have to teach like we did in 1850. But that's okay sometimes, because it makes the kids realize that it doesn't always have to be in front of me, and I still can read out of a textbook. And it's okay, yeah, and it's okay if we have a conversation face to face. And those are important lessons for students to learn as well, at least I believe that. So those are two of my big challenges, I think.
So Dana, you and I had the opportunity to talk a little bit yesterday. So with this new rollout, this one-to-one rollout that you're going to be doing with the iPads, now how are you going to address this issue of the parents that can't afford to get the iPads for the students?
Currently we have a fleet of 30 iPads, so we will be able to offer students that can't afford it. We may also be able to offer financial aid. We run fundraisers every year that provide the school with funds. Every teacher was handed an iPad last April, and that came from our annual auction funds. So we have placed it's been a very deliberate process for us, and that's why we didn't just hand kids iPads. We don't want to hand things out to people that, for the sake of handing it out. So in the deliberate process, we've taken into consideration, well, what happens when they can't afford it? And we're not getting the funds from, a district or something like that. So how are we going to deal with this? And we have financial aid options in place, and we have, help out your neighbor type options in place and things like that too.
Okay, good.
Well, I think there's, I guess, two things that really stand out. With Bring Your Own Device, of course, you have a number of different types of devices. Students forgot their password, so they can't download this app. Their mom took it away from them, so you thought they had it and they didn't bring it today. I don't know how to use an Android. I don't know how to use this brand new thing that I'm not even sure what it is. So there's lots of different platforms that you need to be flexible with, which that could be a whole probably 2-hour discussion on how to go through that. But I think another issue, we've heard a lot today about giving up control. And while I definitely think that's a concern, I would also argue that there's a lot of teachers where it's actually an opposite concern. Giving up control comes easily. What is difficult is when you have a student that is consistently not using their cell phone, it is their personal device, in an appropriate way, and you have to be much more strict. So in order to be flexible, you have to learn to be very, very strict. And for some people, if giving up control is easy, that is a challenge that you might find as well.
Okay. Now, one of the follow-up questions I had for you, Joan, was that you were talking before not only about this inappropriate use, but also about the social media that you're using in the classroom. Now, one of the things that we have seen through the Speak Up survey is that while parents are getting a little bit more familiar with social media, there is also a lot of concern about, is that appropriate in a classroom environment, and is my child going to be safe in that environment? So have you had to deal with that in terms of your usage?
Absolutely. In Arlington, our policy this year is that all communication needs to be public, which I think is just a pretty good guideline regardless. With every new social media, there's some type of way to have a private messaging, and it's called many different things. But having everything public is a really good safeguard for anything. There are lots of things that you need to consider is, people that you can't control tweeting and bringing that into your classroom for certainly. But I think that the value of and I teach high school, so it's completely different. I'm not even sure if I would do this if I had freshmen. Most of my students are 10th and older. But if they are not given the opportunity to practice responsible social media use in a guided setting, I'm concerned about what will happen later.
That's right.
And so being involved in that and being part of that learning process, for me, is a very, very important part as my charge as teacher.
And that's a really interesting, and you're right, we could have several different side conversations here, but increasingly all across the country, I'm hearing this shift in the conversation, which is going away from the acceptable use to the responsible use, with the idea that we have a teaching moment here around digital citizenship, and why do we want to walk away from that instead of embracing that?
Absolutely, and I run into teachable moments all the time with social media, so.
There we go.
As do we all, I think. I think it's important to note that when you have an issue, which happens, especially with their teenagers or their small children, when you have an issue, that's the time when you say, well, this is what our policy states, and you need to have a strong policy, and this is what our policy states, and then say, and how do we move forward from here, and how do we change it so this is an issue again?
I had a very smart superintendent who told me earlier this year, quite often what happens, or not quite often, but sometimes what happens is there'll be something that's inappropriate that's done, and the blame comes back on the technology. If we didn't have this technology, this wouldn't happen. As opposed to what he said was, we know how to deal with bad behavior. So let's think about it as bad behavior and remediate appropriately, rather than immediately blaming the technology from the perspective.
And if I could just add one
Sure,
more
go ahead.
thing before. I also want to mention the value of social media. I have a number of students that for the entire school year, they came in, they didn't speak to any students, and they didn't speak to me. They wouldn't raise their hand if they were confused, read a fabulous article that they were just burning with questions that they wanted to ask. Absolutely silent in class. but through Twitter. It was anonymous, and I developed these relationships with the students that everyone following us got to benefit from because it is completely public.
Right.
So their fabulous questions that they just couldn't ask in class where we all, not just the people in that period, but everybody got to benefit from it. And it was really exciting to get to know their personality through Twitter, different social media.
And it would have been more difficult to do it, or maybe not have that same type of opportunity. It reminds me of a story, I think I mentioned this earlier, that we've been involved with Onslow County with their Project Connect mobile implementation for several years. And one of the stories that I carry around in my heart is of a young man who told me that because of some speech limitations he was always fearful about speaking out in class because he didn't want to be ridiculed, and he was concerned that he would not be understood. And being able to collaborate with his peers through blogging and through some other social media really opened up a whole new world for him. And sometimes we don't think of some of those social impacts when we're talking about mobile learning projects and how that really impacts either the self-esteem of the student or their ability to be more communicative in the class. So thank you for sharing that, Joan. Okay, Bill, challenges.
Challenges. In the beginning, the biggest challenge was we had this cart of mobile devices and sharing it across 6 grade levels. So the coordination of all that. Now we've gotten enough mobile devices at each grade level has some, and then there's the capacity issue. Can our wireless network handle all those devices being on at the same time? So once we've worked out the logistics of all that, the challenges, as you say, about responsible use. And usually that's something where if you have a lesson beforehand of, okay, this is how we should be using it, this is the expectation, the elementary kids will say, oh, okay, that's the expectation, that's what I should be doing. So they're a little more responsible in what they're doing on the devices.
Good. Okay, so let's flip the coin a little bit. Let's go the other side and talk about opportunities. So as we said before, you're all doing amazing things, and you're obviously don't need to bring the pom-poms out for the cheerleader routine around mobile learning. But what do you see as opportunities that are untapped? What's the untapped potential of using this type of wireless technology, mobile devices, to transform learning or to disrupt learning, as we were talking about this morning? What's kind of out there on the horizon for you?
I think the students having the ability to really drive their own education and really make it that individualized education, and really what they want drives the classroom. And that does make us have to relinquish some control and be able to, say, all right, you know what, that's a great opportunity, let's go with that and let's see where it leads us. And if it leads us in a direction that we never knew, then that's okay. But them being able to say, you know what, I took this to this step in this class, it really makes them value lifelong learning, and hopefully being, that we're all hopefully preparing them for college, that is the next step, that when they go to college, they're curious learners and they want to continue that, and really being able to drive it instead of me driving it as the teacher, they're driving it as the students. And I think that while some of us may be on the cusp of that, I think a lot of us are still, that's untapped for a lot of teachers. They still want to stand in front of the classroom instead of allowing kids to drive it themselves.
So I think Dana is absolutely on point with that, so I can't add to that. But one thing I will say, well, before this conference I would have said augmented reality, but it seems like it's being tapped in many different ways. But that's absolutely something that I think is exciting to start to explore or to continue to explore.
Well, as you know, Chris has a session tomorrow morning where he's going to be demonstrating some of the augmented reality within the classroom for some of the projects. So that'll be interesting to tap into that as well. Bill?
I think one of the biggest opportunities is to individualize the learning. You can really have different groups within your classroom working at different levels. For example, in math, you could have one group that's struggling work on just their basic math facts, whereas the advanced group could be working on higher level multiplication. So it really opens up the opportunity for the teacher to have small groups individualize and let them, as you said, go off and find their own information.
So you bring up a really good point, Bill, because my next question was about how do we not only envision this future, but how do we move other teachers to that place? And I know that one of Dana's responsibilities is as an academic coach to be able to help with other teachers. So I need you to kind of, for Joan and for Bill, to be that academic coach as well. So what do you think is needed to move other teachers to that place, whether it is structuring the classroom differently, Bill, like you were talking about, or using social media, Joan? Where do we need to go with that? And how have, either from your perspective, Dana, what works in terms of moving teachers to sort of this new place?
Well, it's scary, and there's no doubt about it that you're going to have people kicking and screaming as they go. But I think when you create an environment of trust between whoever is going to lead the charge and those that are going to follow, that they know that it's okay if this doesn't work, and it's okay if it fails, and it's okay if I need to step back and say, you know what, I don't really understand, and you have the support there. And that starts at the top. At least in my school, it starts with the principal and comes down from there. We have the support of our administration. They've put someone like me in place to make sure that if they have a question and they don't want it to, fail miserably in front of everybody, they can come and ask. And that starts with an environment of trust. At least that's how I say it.
Okay. So either Joan or Bill, what do you think is needed to move your colleagues along?
I think, again, the support of administration is definitely helpful. We can sometimes get a substitute to come in so that if I'm doing a lesson in my classroom and one of my colleagues wants to see how it's done, they can get a substitute for a few hours, come over, watch how the lesson is done, and then we can debrief later during a planning period. And I think for a lot of the teachers that are nervous, once they see how it's done, it's like, oh boy, that was easy. So demonstrating or me pushing into their class to help them with a lesson. Or we have our technology coordinator also. She comes in, helps with the lessons. And also just having the mobile devices there in your classroom. I have a new teacher on my team who hadn't used iPads before, but we just parked the iPad cart in her room for a couple days, and she started coming up with all these great ideas of how to integrate it.
Okay.
So I would say one challenge that I really didn't think of until today and talking with some colleagues is there are definitely some teachers that are implementing it very successfully in some of their subjects, and then there are other curriculum that is very, very difficult, whether it's AP testing, IB testing, standardized testing, where they feel very pressured to meet a certain number of standards within the school year. So fear and being uncomfortable is not necessarily the challenge that they are facing, but really having, I guess, a place where you can talk to other teachers for ideas with your very specific curriculum. How is it that you integrate it? And remembering, like many speakers said today, you need to listen for the demand. And if the demand is not there, or if it's there in a different way, you need to listen to that, whether it's coming from the students or just coming from feedback. You may be implementing it in a completely different way, and you just need to either have that space to discuss it or that time to figure that out.
I think that's really interesting about the demand side of this. One of the things that we've been seeing over the last couple of years through the Speak Up data is an increased demand from parents who are interested in their students using mobile devices. And in fact, one of the questions that's on the current Speak Up survey, Speak Up opened up on Wednesday, is that we're asking parents a hypothetical question. So if there was two comparable classes at your child's school, and one was using mobile devices, your child's own mobile device, and one prohibited, which class would you want your child in? I don't have the data findings for you. Sorry, we'll have to have that one next year. Okay, you'll have to all come back to find that out. But I think that this is very interesting in terms of the parental demand. So have you seen any of that from a demand standpoint in terms of parents' interest, Bill?
We do have, I've seen that at our school where if two teachers on a team are using technology a lot and the other two haven't started to, The other two teachers will come and say, okay, the parents of my students are starting to ask, when am I going to start using the technology? So can you show me how to do that?
Oh, that's interesting. So then that is a driver.
We've seen it at course selection time, because when course selection comes around, if there are teachers that have notoriously used the mobile devices, whether it be iPads or phones or what have you, those classes are the classes that parents are calling, demanding their children be in. And, you have to take into consideration when you're in a Catholic school that they foot the bill. So,
Right.
That's a little bit different. And those are the classes that the kids want to take as well, but the parents really have pushed them. We see this as a way that you can learn differently, and so we want you in this class.
That's very interesting.
Well, one thing that may be surprising to some is, this year I'm teaching a lot of intensified and gifted classes for the first time, really. And my background is more with more urban centers, more urban districts. And I have to say that this year is the first year that I am getting just a little bit of gentle pushback, actually. And I think a lot of it is that some of the parents are feeling pressured. Is my child going to miss out if I don't buy him or her an iPod or a smartphone? Whereas before, a good 95 to usually 100% of my students did have a smartphone. This was addressed in the last panel on equity as well. It may be an expensive phone, but it's a cheap alternative to internet and a computer. And so this is a new challenge for me, because I don't have a full class of students with smartphones. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
So a different way to structure the class then.
But it can be done.
It can be done, right. So I have one more question, then I'm going to open it up to the audience for some of their questions. I want to know, from your perspective, what are your students seeing with this? Because one of the things that we think is really interesting is that the students have, and this is based on our focus group work, have a very keen sense in terms of how technology is being used in their classrooms. They may not always have the opportunity to voice that, but they have a very keen understanding of where it's being used in a sophisticated way and when it's just being used as an add-on or just as an overlay onto the instructional plan. So do you have any thoughts on what the perceptions are of your students in terms of how technology is being used?
I don't know about you guys, but I see it when it's seamless and when it's integrated correctly and it's not cumbersome in the classroom. It's almost as if they don't even notice it, because it just happens. And the more that you use, the more that they want to use. But when it is used as an overlay, or when it's just like, oh, well, we'll use the iPads today and it'll be the only day all year that we use them, then they're kind of like, well, that was cool for the minute, and then they move on. So I think if it's seamless, and that's ultimately, I think, the goal, if it's seamless and in its integration, then it's like expected, and it's there, and it's almost like the textbook.
And it becomes like air.
Yeah.
It's just part of the air.
Absolutely, and I think another way, if you ever want to try something, you're not sure how it's going to go, don't do whole class. One of the things I like to do is I might, while we're watching a video, just talk to a small group of kids as if they're the only ones that get this secret information. And why don't you guys tweet about this documentary? Hashtag it, hashtag Blue Gold, hashtag Gasland, whatever film we're watching. And they look at me like, what? I'm like, it's okay, but don't talk about it too much. And when the kids start seeing this, it's like, wow, well, I want to know what this is all about. And as that spreads, you don't have to sell it, because the students are selling it themselves. And so that's a much more organic way to introduce it. So if there is something that you're not sure if it's going to look like an artificial overlay, that's just a little trick that I've learned.
That's interesting, Joan. You're sneaky. You're a sneaky one. Bill.
One of the interesting things, every now and then we do kind of an explore the iPad, and they go through and they see the different apps that we haven't used, and they'll say, oh, well, we could probably use this. So seeing how the 4th and 5th graders think of how they could integrate the technology. Some of them come into class and they're like, oh, my dad downloaded this on his iPad and it would be great. Can we try it out at school? So they also bring ideas. They're thinking about it at home as well as in school.
That's really interesting. We've been talking for a while about how today's students are not just adopting technologies, they're really adapting the technologies to meet their needs. And so thank you for sharing that, Bill, because that was a wonderful representation of that. Okay, so I think that we've got some runners out there. Ah, yes, my friend Erin. Does anyone have any questions? I have tons of questions for the panel, so don't feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to come up with a question. But if anyone does have a question, Erin is right in the back. You can raise your hand, and she'll be happy to bring over the microphone. Yeah. And if I'm looking at you funny, it's because I have these great big lights in my eyes, and I can't really see you out there.
Hi. I have two questions, and they're pretty disparate, but I'll just throw them both out there. One is, do you all find that your students automatically learn better with technology? Or, you cited that students use Twitter and that there was conversations that were happening throughout all your classes. Have you had instances or where you feel like traditional methodology works better? That's question number one. Question number two is, with regard to vision and opportunity, most of you cited like administrative support or hardware needs. But are there any content opportunities, or do you find that content's readily available with everything that there is and you can put it together pretty readily?
So I think your first question is a really interesting one. Let's take the first one first, and then we'll go to the second one. So it's about this idea of the effectiveness of using technology from a teaching and learning standpoint, the impact on the students. Are there opportunities where you've looked at it and you've thought, well, this technology could do X, Y, and Z in helping me with this particular lesson, but maybe it'd be better to do A, B, and C. So any sort of examples or ideas that you have on the effectiveness of using technology?
Well, I personally think that there are times when, they shouldn't touch it and they don't need to, and it shouldn't be out of a 50-minute or an hour-and-a-half class. They shouldn't have screen time the entire time. Nothing's going to take the place of us as teachers. At least I hope not. I still need a paycheck. So, we still need to do kind of what we do, and they still need to be able to conduct traditional research at times, because there are times where, if they're searching Wikipedia, it's not always the best possible place for them to be searching. So they may need to go to a book and find out what a primary document is and things like that in terms of, history. So yeah, there are times where I want them to actually look at the Declaration of Independence in writing or things like that. So traditional methods sometimes trump the technology, but sometimes the technology assists in the traditional methods as well.
Yeah, I would definitely agree to that. The ultimate goal is successful student learning, and whatever's meeting those needs needs to be the tool that's implemented. So again, going back to listening to your students and listening to where the demand is, and where there isn't a demand or a demand for something else, that's where we need to go.
And we use, for research, we use the internet a lot, but every now and then the internet goes down. And the kids all look, they're like, well, what do we do now? And I point over to the encyclopedias and they say, well, how do we use that? So it's another life skill of how to use paperbacks and books and those materials for research. One of the things that I do find using technology, when we don't have a 1-to-1, we have maybe a 2-to-1 ratio, is that they really learn how to work with each other. Mm-hmm. So it's a skill, a lifelong skill of how do I work with, oh, I'm a boy, that's a girl, I have to work with her. Or people that you don't get along with on a day-to-day basis, how do I get to work with them? So that's one of the good skills that we also work on in terms of using the technology.
That's very interesting. I think that at the end of the day, as I think one of you said, we're really looking for successful learners, lifelong, life-wide learners, as Chris said this morning. I think one of the things that has been so interesting for us is I do this quite often with panel discussions with students. I ask them about the value of the teacher in the process. And unequivocally, the students all endorse the role of the teacher. They value a teacher. They want to have a connection with the teacher. They want to have a relationship with the teacher. They understand what the teacher can do for them. Sometimes the teachers they have are not living up to that ideal, But in general, the students are not looking at their education as being something that they don't need a teacher in. And so I think that's really a powerful statement as well. Now, the second question had to do with, and we're talking about visions and opportunities, had to do with content. So Joan, why don't you take that one, because I did spend a little time on your website. And so, so is content an obstacle?
Oh, right.
Or is it an opportunity?
It's definitely an opportunity because, well, for one thing, if you are, planning for your class, you have 5 minutes left, you're just doing last minute things and you come across this amazing article. You don't need to rush to the copy room to print it out and figure out, okay, how are we going to use this? You just have that link, and especially, it's a lot easier if you have a place to store all of your digital curriculum. So that's where my website comes in very handy. But if I discover something at the last minute that I think this lesson cannot do without, it's a matter of copying and pasting that link. And then if you're using social media, you could even open it up to the students and ask them, how are they going to digest this article? What is something that how did this speak to them? You don't need to go through and write your 10 quick questions on and run to the copier. So absolutely, I think that using digital resources allows you to just literally just tap right into everything that's on the internet with a quickness. And also, it's a lot easier to develop your own curriculum, I think, because you might front load your planning quite a bit, and that's what I do. But then you know that you have this copy, hopefully permanent, as long as the servers don't go down. And you know that this hard work that you're putting in hours and hours before the lesson, you're going to have this forever. You're going to be able to share it with other teachers, and it's available. And so I absolutely think that the curriculum is readily available, especially when the students have some type of device, and I like to call them portals, because that is how I want them to see it, is a portal into all of these things that are there for them to take.
Any other thoughts on this idea of content?
I think there's so much out there that sometimes you have to be careful, because sometimes it can get muddied down and bogged down with stuff that isn't necessarily the best thing that we should be sharing with our students. But in terms of what's out there, sometimes it's time consuming to sort through it all and to make sure that you can find good stuff. But when you do have good stuff, it makes them so much more engaged. And when you do have a place, we use a course management system, so I'll put it up on my course management system, and then not only are they seeing it, but their parents are seeing it, and they're seeing what you're doing in their classroom, and it helps sell your class to them. And there's no gray area, really. It's out there, it's up there, and the kids see it, and their parents know it as well.
We use a lot, at least in my class, Brain Pop a lot. And the kids just love, like, if we read something in a textbook, and then they're like, well, we want to find out more about this. I'm like, oh, let's go ask Tim and Moby. And they love using that. So there's ways to guide them to find the right content on the internet.
And if I could add that Tim and Moby are on Twitter, and they will follow you back.
There we go.
And that's a teachable moment too, because then you can show them, okay, well, this isn't the best resource, but here, this is a .gov instead of a .com, and this is a better resource. And that's teachable for them, because then when they go off and they're not within your classroom setting anymore, they have that ability to know that information.
And I think what Dana is talking about really speaks to what we're really doing is empowering the students to drive their own learning. And that's such a powerful and important thing.
Fabulous. Erin, do we have some more questions out here? Over here.
Hi, this question is for the high school teacher. I think that I heard a little bit of excitement in your voice about having a one-to-one instead of the BYOD. And yet everything I've heard all of you comment on to me was device non-specific. So I'm wondering about how you feel about moving from a BYOD to the one-to-one. Is that really a better thing?
Kathy, were you talking about Joan or Dana?
Joan. I think I heard her say that about one-to-one.
I think it was Joan was talking about the fact that you currently have a set of iPads?
Yeah, so we have a cart that is shared. We each get them for a quarter, but it sounds like that's more along Dana's lines.
My school is going one-to-one next year. And currently we do a bring your own device type deal. I think for us, maybe the excitement is that it's such an initiative for us, and it's been something so deliberate in the movement in that direction, and it's standardizing it really for all the kids. And our major goal is to allow for a textbook delivery system with the iPads, because our book bills, our students have book bills, are upwards of $700. And they're books, and they're great, and I love books. I was a history major. But when you look at the iBooks on the iPad and you want to hear Lincoln speak and you click on his picture and he's there talking, they're fascinating. And, it's so much, it offers so much more. Instead of jumping to YouTube and bringing this up and letting them hear that and all this, it's right there in front of them. So it's been a process that we've been looking at for 2 years. So I think maybe the excitement is that it's becoming reality for us because it's been a long process. But I think it's going to be a positive move for us to standardize what it is that we're trying to do.
Dana, why don't you tell the audience what you did last night? Because I think this is fascinating also.
Well, I would have loved to have been here for the reception, but we actually had a parent night, and we had our parents in, and we invited 6th, 7th, and 8th grade parents of potential students to our high school in to kind of roll out to them we're calling it the big idea, and small I, capital D in idea. And because we had them actually come in and go through a mini schedule and go around to the classes so that they could see what their kids see when we teach with technology in our classes. And they went to all the core classes, so they went to math, science, social studies, and literature, and then they went to some of the electives, foreign language, and we have religion. So they went around, and the buzz and the excitement that I saw when I was leaving to run to the train station was so exciting for me, because to get the parents excited about it, I said to them, you might be learning how to FOIL a math equation, or you might be learning about prime meridian. They did a QR code scavenger hunt for vocabulary when they came to my class. And, we all know what prime meridian is, we all know what the equator is, but they're finding it out in a different way. They're not looking it up in the back of their textbook. So they were really excited, and the buzz was just, it literally kind of lightened up my night, so it was good.
Thank you. Yeah. Now, Joan, I know that when we talked, and I think some of the documentation you gave me, you have a goal actually to get to a paperless classroom also. So how do you envision that happening?
Well,
definitely. Or are you there now?
I'm not there now, no.
Okay.
But I haven't been to the copy room for 2 weeks, so I'm getting there. So again, having a place to keep everything. My students, basically when they come in, they have a bell ringer that is done through Google Forms. We get to go over it. So we can either go over it on the smart board, or we can use some of the screencasting apps that there's many of them I can talk about if anyone has questions. And then instead of doing a PowerPoint presentation where they used to fill in the blanks, we use Nearpod, which is a new app that actually works. Right now it's just on iPhones, but I'm sure it'll be on Androids and everything else soon. Nearpod is a really, really good resource for that. It's you get to decide, you get to control the presentation, but it's also very, very interactive. So it's a good app for teachers that maybe are not ready to give up full control, but really want to practice implementing these things. So really, if you're interested, on my website, I have a lesson actually on all of the ways that I've used cell phones. So if you go to thescienceroom.org, and I have a search bar, I search BYOD, and all of these apps and ideas that I've gone through are there. And I think that might be a good resource.
Good. Erin, do we have any other questions? Okay, so it's back to me, which is fine. So as a final question for each one of you, because here we are, we're at the end of day 1 of the Wireless EdTech Conference. We have half a day tomorrow, but let's think ahead to next year. So let's think ahead to next October of 2013, and we're sitting here conceptually, the same panel. Don't worry, I'm not like writing your names down. But conceptually, we're sitting here a year from now. What's going to be the big idea a year from now? What is it going to be that you're going to want to come up to this audience and talk to this audience about what you're doing in your classroom? What do you see happening out there that's going to be the headline for a year from now?
I would say augmented reality.
Okay, so your idea is to bring that into your classroom.
Either bring it into the classroom or I think it's EdLab. They were talking about outside of the classroom, which is really, I mean, you change the context of learning and you change the learning. So going to the Natural History Museum and using augmented reality in some way I can't even think of. That's what I'm excited about. If I can't even come up with what it's going to look like, that's really exciting to me.
Okay.
I think for me, it's being able to walk into my teachers' classrooms and see them not necessarily standing up in the front of the classroom, but sitting and being engaged with the students and being right in there learning along with them and making it really a classroom where they're both, it's dual learning and you know, taking it wherever they want to take it, whether it be a student-driven idea or a teacher-driven idea. And that may be that we're jumping on and doing some type of augmented lab or something like that, or, you know, going to the museum that we can't, or exploring London on the app from this morning. You know, whatever it is, that we're doing it together and that it really changes the face of what a traditional classroom looks like.
You know, it's amazing. You have another second to think about your answer, Bill. What's amazing to me is since I have the opportunity to visit so many classrooms around the country, particularly around mobile learning, you can almost judge kind of how it's going to go when you go do the observation based on walking in the class and seeing where the teacher is physically. I mean, it's a little bit of an observational trick. But whether that teacher is sitting down with a group of students, or there are, as I've seen at Jamestown, some fabulous centers that are set up and the students are directing their own learning and the teacher is working with a small group, or as often happens, I still walk into classrooms where the teacher is still standing up at the front of the class in the podium, even though the students do have mobile devices. The actual format has not changed, which makes you wonder about the instructional practice, whether that has changed or not. So I think that's really interesting to focus in on the physical look and feel of that classroom.
I think if I could just add a good metric that I always use and strive for, haven't quite gotten there yet, is if the students have no idea what the front of the room is, if you say go to the front of the room and no clue, I think that's something that I would like to look forward to.
I may have to borrow that one, Joan. Yeah, we're all going to borrow that one and start asking students that one. So Bill, a year from now, we're sitting here. What do you think?
Well, the idea of a paperless classroom, that's intriguing. So seeing what resources I could use so that there was more of our work was done completely on the mobile devices and having less paper. Because that's one thing that I find myself swimming in is paper.
Absolutely. Well, please join me in thanking our wonderful panel here today in terms of sharing